Greetings, everybody! Welcome once more to the Dracovin Empire. I hope you're ready to dive into the world of darkness once more. Yes, the world of darkness calls to us, in particular today, Werewolf The Apocalypse. We're going to be talking about another one of the tribes. So if you're ready to dive in and learn about the Wendigo, take my hand. I'm your host and guide here, and I can open a gateway through the gauntlet to take us from our world to the world of darkness. But do remember, before we go, tip me a little like, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave some comments about this topic in the description below. Let me know what you think about this. This is going to be interesting. There's some things to discuss. The world of darkness calls, my hand is outreached, and the gate is open. So, Wendigo. Where to start? There's a lot to start with, a lot to unpack about this one that I will discuss today. Especially because of their evolution and changes between things like their versions between all the other, from original to revised to W20 into 5th edition. So we have things to talk about. And a lot of books to also talk about, because this is one of those ones where I can actually name a lot that gives us good bits of information. Of course, any of the core books, and similarly speaking, at back end there below me, Player's Guides, are very good. I'm showing off one of the W20 book and the Player's Guide. This Player's Guide is the revised version of it. But again, these are good points in time to start you on your journey. The Tribe books, Wendigo Tribe Book Wendigo, also from 2 different editions, are very good here. In this case, there are 2 other books here that I thought were very interesting and probably good to mention. Yeah. Our good friend here, Werewolf The Wild West. Now, why would I say that one? Well, Wendigo is probably one of those ones that's in the forefront in a lot of stuff like that. And of course, Laws of the Wild West there is also there. Laws of the Wild, I'm sorry, is also there, which is a LARP book. But again, I do sometimes recommend Mind's Eye Theater talk about the LARP books because they do provide information and guides that could help you look at them. So yeah. Anyway, let's begin. Let's talk about and kind of address some things about it. To start out. So here's a start. It's a tribe of the Werewolf Apocalypse. They consider themselves the purest of Gath, and they seek to destroy the worm and preserve their old traditions. This can lead to some difficulty in it. It's sort of like I've talked about how there are things that can be, socially, culturally unacceptable, or not, maybe not unacceptable, difficult in a way things are presented sometimes too. We talked about it, I think, in certain places with other tribes. This is one because they are deeply Native American and have this kind of purity about them. That's why they kind of have this kind of weird position that's a little different than something like Ukenna, one of their brothers. Ukenna, they've learned, they've adapted, they've evolved. Wendigo, some of them have, but it feels like their position here up into W20 isn't evolved. We're going to dive into it today, but it is one of those things that's like, this is the point in time where I'm like, hey, 5e, you had an opportunity. They squandered. At least in my opinion, they didn't really address the good kind of updates that would make a good evolution. Anyway, so their totem's Wendigo. They are part of the Gaur Nation, and they're also known as Younger Brother. Just some basics there. Let's talk about their history. Their earliest, their most ancient history. So here's where some of the things that I have to talk about with them. So, they refer to worm bringers and worm comers. What are these? Worm bringers, Europeans. They brought the worm with them to the Pure Lands. Worm comers, like welcomers, I guess it's supposed to be. It's basically European tribes of Gath. they are to blame for bringing the Eater Souls, the sacrifice of Croatian, almost bringing about the apocalypse, that kind of thing. It feels like a derogatory term. So, I'm going to try to kind of avoid a lot of the Wendigo derogatory terms, which may not be technically, but they feel like that. Wormbringer and Wormcomer, they definitely do. These are things, though, that if you are looking at, especially in the tribe books, you are going to see this kind of information. They do kind of walk away from some things when we kind of talk about W20 to a degree. But these are, anyway. So they're one of the 3 tribes that came to the Orleans, the Americas, away from where there's a lot of influence of the worm and the wild. The Uktena as older brother, the Croatan as middle brother, the Uktena being the shamans, the Croatan being the leaders and diplomats, and then the Wendigo, younger brother, the warriors, settled in North America. Their tribe started by following Sasquatch. But Sasquatch ceased to be, and Wendigo basically became their totem. The reason behind this was lost to them, and there's some feud to this, but the truth is that Sasquatch is Wendigo. Basically, the journey to the Pure Lands, the Wendigo, with the assistance of a newer ferocious spirit, basically guarded the bridge over the Bering Strait, so no worm beast could follow the brothers' 3 tribes' trail. That's the story as it was. So Sasquatch became Wendigo, became something more vicious and savage in a way, in order to protect the people of the Pure Lands when the Bering Strait was still collapsed, prevented the great traveling between. Big things that, didn't really happen the same way in these lands. In Peregrine, the War of Rage. These didn't happen the same way here. The Croatan convinced the Wendigo that Gaia would control the number of humans. Peregrine wasn't really needed. We didn't have to mass call humans. Humans remember their place. Never felt the claws of Wendigo. For fair, in the War of Rage, well, they didn't stink of worm or aid any enemies, then, hey, you're fine. Granted, in Peregrine, the Get Defenders of Russia started calling a number of Wendigo kinfolk in Siberia. Again, there's a connection that there have been a lot of generations and connections with Siberia and Russia that the people of there sort out. I kind of talk about this. That this is again something from 5th edition that links to here. We'll talk about it more, but there was an all-out war between Get and Wendigo. There's a war of legends, stories. No one remembers how the war ended, but it's assumed that when the Imperium did. But again, this is also something that the Wendigo remembered. Hey, as much as these, have been away from each other, they do remember things. Cahokia, the first major city in the Pure Lands. The brothers argued over what to do with it. The destruction of the city left them in brutal rivalry and resentment and withdrawn from each other. The southern tribes, under protection of Wendigo, became part of the League of 5 Nations in 1450. They also tried to fix the relations between the 3 tribes, but rivalries between indigenous nations and themselves basically didn't help. And then, of course, the Europeans. Those that would bring new influence of the worm, new thread of the worm, misunderstandings about the worm. Go see my 10th video to see some of the misunderstandings about the worm and understanding it and what was going on in these lands. The Victorian Age leading into modern age. We now have European settlers. The Wendigo were the first to come in contact with these settlers. The reaction was harsh dismissal. Their kinfolk tribes basically called suit, though they sometimes pitied these new foreigners. Everything changed when the Croatians died. Moon bridges that could have ensured the messengers of the Croatians could have reached them faster were closed off. There was resentment and anger that still simmered, and the Croatans didn't trust their brothers to wait for them. And they knew the Eater of Souls would bring about the apocalypse. So they chose to sacrifice themselves to contain it. And this led to arguments between the Uktena and Wendigo, made it kind of like, who was responsible for Croatans dying? The wedge between them still exists today. But the Wendigo's remaining warriors didn't want to yield the face of the people that were invaded, the Europeans and the Garo from Europe and from the rest of the world, the other tribes they had been separated from. They fought back, they fell back, fought again, and continued on and on for over a century. They were forced to retreat to the most remote clearings and waged war from there. If a kinfolk, there was bitter arguments. If kinfolk accepted European customs should be taken along, how to proceed with old cairns, and if they should turn to the Uktena for help. The tribe was divided. The radical headed towards the polar circle. Others remained at least near their cairns until messages had reached Uktena, and they could monitor the activities of the gallery that came from Europe and from the West. The West, as it was called. It had been the people of this nation's, the natives, land for centuries. And so, yeah, just like in our real world, the history here, because it does parallel us, the injustices to the Native Americans were terrible. Honestly speaking, the Garrow of Europe weren't much better in the way that they treated kinfolk of those of these lands, the Wendigo, Tena, and such. Yeah. Bloodstained lands with war. Because of the war that was going on. Cairns were taken by force. They didn't pay attention to rights that had been put there. Storm Eater was released. That was a big result of all this. And Wendigo were forced to work with their enemies to take it down. It didn't last long. Wounded Knee provided that their thirst for the land made no such alliance possible. The Native American people, tribes, were scattered. A lot of loss of old growths. And Wendigo's heart was broken. Now we reach the 20th century. And, there's a lot of old wounds. And the Weaver has been taking hold of a lot of lands. And people of Native American descent have been swept up to this. Worm built roads to access Alaska. Snowmobiles and great vehicles made their way north easier. And the people of European-based descent, the people of these cultures that are now here, the new Americas, Canada, Mexico, these regions that are now in there, brought their connections to Worm and Weaver to these places that had been far away. So yeah. Now the Wendigo had their lands to the north, alone, out of all the system. Like, Get of Fenris were the only people that handled northern conditions, other than. And they were too busy with other problems, farther in other areas. But with these tools of the Weaver, now, anything's perfect. So in 1999, the territory of Nunavut was created under Aboriginal rule, and Wendigo kin had a land where they call their own. It gave Wendigo hope that the other nations of, the Americas would follow suit. Many claimed to have the land to be useless or unwanted, and, it never was to the people that had lived here before. It was land. So, that's kind of where we get into the situation where Tena adapted, Wendigo rebelled, and simmered in anger. I think that's a big thing to think about with Wendigo. They didn't adapt. They just got out. And remember. Let's talk about some of their organizations. So, their internal organization, kind of mysterious. They don't like mixing members of their tribe with other Garrow. They see it as a danger to their culture, their cultural purity. Again, that's that idea that Wendigo have authority, which never sounds good no matter what culture you are, unfortunately. There are rebellious members of the younger generation that question the wisdom of that. They feel an influence of them in the Garrow Nation is lessened because they're isolated. So this is an idea where the younger generations are driving more interesting directions in the Wendigo. But again, here's one of those things that it's a catch-22 that doesn't always sound like They're using that concept in a very interesting way. We'll talk. They have a few camps. They don't have a lot of numbers, but the numbers are closely knit. And, you'd think that having camps would splinter this smaller tribe anyway. But they kind of see it like similar to their human camp. In their societies, they have tribes. Warriors societies, police societies, education societies more. So these camps that exist are basically groups with slightly different opinions, but still reunited under the idea that they are still Wendigo. The Warpath. This is your stereotypical Wendigo. When people think angry, bitter, willing to take a fight to anybody. Whether it's someone of European descent or a Garu that had from elsewhere in the world. They had their greatest power in the 1800s with some notable kin. Sitting Bull, Crazy Bulls. And they fought against the nation that had been oppressing them. Warpath has shrunk in recent years, but there are some of the youngsters who are tired of hollow words of elders about peace and cooperatively and want to join this camp's rank, which is interesting because that's kind of opposite of what I was talking about earlier. So I guess the young split a little bit. There are those that, I guess depends on what camp you're into, who you're listening to. But anyway, recent events had the rise of things like Native American-owned casino basically feel like a kick to Wendigo's pride, because that's kind of embracing the Weaver in a little bit of ways. So, it feeds people that are in the Warpath lineage. That their native kin sometimes have to go to great lengths to survive. And, again, it's that idea of pride, purity, that isn't really good in their society. Disgrace. Submitting to the ways of the Weaver and those descended from originally American societies. So, yeah, it's kind of a mess. Then there's the other major camp, the Sacred Hoop. They preach reverence of all spirits, whether they are from Native American kind of connection or Native, the brothers kind of connections, or if they're from elsewhere in the world, Europe or otherwise. All spirits are to be reverenced. And they came into some power and fought for prevalence in the tribe that has left neither they or the Warpath as clear winners since the 1960s. So basically, Warpath, Sacred Hoop are the two major camps, and they compete with each other. These are the people that invite outsiders to drum circles, European or otherwise, write books about their sacred rituals and aspects of Native American culture. These are those ones too. They aren't necessarily integrating, but they're trying to show off their culture. They work with New Age interests, with Native cultures, and shamanism. They try to bring a better understanding of their kin. And they still want to hold their ways true to Earth Mother. But they also want to be like, hey, here's our ways, impress upon it, respect it. But there's also members of the tribe that are dissatisfied, impatient with their elders, and the Sacred Hoop is growing older in a way, and maybe a little thin, because, there's dissatisfaction in a lot of ways, in general, with how the wind grows. Again, that weird bit of dissatisfaction. There are two other camps that are important now. The Secret Hoop and the Ghost Dancers. The Secret Hoop, well, they're kind of secretive. Basically, they play delicate game. They understand that there is no removing European people and all the things that come about from European influence from the Americans. You can't remove everybody from Canada that's not of Native American descent. Can't remove everybody from the United States of Native American descent. Same with anywhere in the Americas. You can't get rid of it. And, European, nowadays, of course, you've got other people from around the world here, but again, when I say America, we originate our culture from very European centric. originally settled. So I think that's kind of where I'm kind of trying to present this here. It's not just Europeans now, but that is the kind of crux of it. Anyway, basically, members of the Warpath and the Ghost Dance, basically planning kind of that stuff, trying to articulate that for over 500 years. Radical plans. And the Wendigo, especially those in Secret Hope, know that this is like what would be left. Tenna, maybe some Red Talons, maybe some more militant groups like the Black Furies. If they would enact a plan like that, and these groups would maybe go with them, they're fighting the rest of the Garu Nation also, too. And this could just be the Worm's work. Garu Nation fighting each other. You know, just kill Guy faster. So as long as the Warpath and Ghost Dancers existed, the Secret Hoop basically has been attached to individual Wendigo here and there as they need. These two groups that are militant, the two militant groups, remember, the Sacred Hoops, the non-militant group, the Warpath and the Ghost Dancers that I'm talking about are the two militant groups. Basically keep them kind of like arguing with each other and not organizing together. The two militant groups, which then would, some more extreme parts of them would enact some very extreme plans. So, yeah, they've played against each other, basically. And the Secret Group wants to keep it secret that they've been doing that. They've basically been making sure these other two very militant camps have been keeping each other in check. But to talk about the Ghost Dancers, we should mention them. Yeah, they are more make the land how it was before. You know, they do tend to do more, to be more squeamish when it comes to direct combat. That's the thing about the Ghost Dancers. Unlike Warpath, which are much more fighting and are willing to commit to violence, they maybe don't have as much so the overarching goal of wiping the slate clean. The Ghost Dancers serves to make the land whole and clean as it once was. That's their idea. But they're kind of squeamish, not big on direct combat, you know? So, yeah. They want to get rid of the Pure Lands and, you know, get rid of its litigations, its laws, of the cultures that have come about from European descent, of the people that are oftentimes white-skinned. You know? Unfortunately, yeah. So they've had some success. Nuvat, given the native people by the Canadian government, and Nuvat's place in Canadian parliamentary government, is a success of Ghost Dancers. So they are trying to get their own section of things. Again, it's this weird thing that they have kind of goals that are very extreme, but they aren't as militant. But then you have the Warpath, which is much more militant and maybe not as extreme. But if they would work together, yeah, again, Secret Hoop keeping them from doing that. Interestingly enough. So, let's talk about their cultures and beliefs. So they're warriors, trackers, ambushers. They use their power against the Worm. And anybody else that needs to. Anybody else that needs to be hunted. And this does also include European Garu, because, hey, they helped the destruction of the Croatians. All Wendigo, though, save for those in Russia, are descended from Native American people and wild wolves. Kinfolk are the same. Again, this is one of those things of they try to be that pure. Their internal customs are derived from a lot of Native American practices. The only cairn that we know they directly have is the Steppe of the Siberian Wilds in the Arctic northeast of Russia. Politically, there are hardliner Wendigos that believe they can basically claim the lands of themselves again. Bring about the blood of those of European descent and their, the Garu from Europe. Just splatter the blood across the ground. They have had some popularity with frustrations. And there is some talk of alliance with the like-minded Red Talons. Because they are lupine. Hey, you know, they're a little bit different, a little bit shunned. But anyway, they also, most within the leading culture of the Wendigo, take the view that defeating the worm in all its forms takes precedence over having a particular breed of hominid to dominate the continent. So they do limit their ties to other tribes. They are still kind of close to the Uktena. Again, they have their strange relationship. And they do have some alliance members amongst the Silent Striders and Red Talons, and respect for the Black Furies. Otherwise than them, the Wendigo, only some of them will ally themselves temporarily with European, and usually for short term, and with much distrust. And they really do hate the Fianna, Get-Offenders, and Shadow Lords, in particular. Justice for them is swift. If there's a personal disagreement, get a duel. And if the case has to go to the Tribal Council of Elders, well, the punishment is usually banishment or death. The Wendigo still are deeply spiritual people, with deep traditions and rituals. And again, it ties to a combination of the Native American kinfolk, which have influenced their culture, and Garo heritage as a whole. They also practice these ritual purity before hunts and battles and other major undertakings, and seek aid from spirits in battles. They basically also are looking for their hints at the Croatoan, the lost brethren. And this idea of purity is very high. They make elaborate rites and rituals as pure as possible, purify themselves before major or minor events, from wars to hunts. They turn to spiritual means, journeying to the Umbra, and look for answers to questions and quests. It takes its name from its totem, the Wendigo, which teaches them the power of cold, cutting wind, stealth abilities, to ambush the forces of the world, and occasionally trespassers too. There is actually some practice ritual cannibalism in emulation to their totem. Hey, Wendigo is technically a cannibal. These activities are basically kept on the DL for most times. They are another tribe named after their totem. Again, this might be a hint why, when we talk about 5th edition here in a second, they changed their name. Understandable that way, thinker. So, there is definitely some ideas that are in here that are basically difficult. So, kind of keep it at that, as I presented a little bit here. I'm presenting the base thing of what was kind of stated in a lot of these older rule books. There are things that have kind of evolved, and sometimes some of this stuff is kind of missed, where which book is which, and which thing to kind of move out. Just keep that in mind for some of these things here. I've got an unfortunate inspiration, especially with the possible emulation of Wendigo, ritualistically, of, you know, European explorers that don't put a very good idea about natives of this region. So, again, we have seen that there are cultures in the Americas that practice a lot of things, but again, like the Aztecs, well, the Eyes of the Werewolf, it was because of influence of vampires and worm taint. But they were doing ritualistic sacrifices and stuff too, so it's not outside the idea that there might be rituals, especially in certain areas, that would be reason behind some of these things. And they do emulate a spirit which is known for a Wendigo. Kind of not necessarily sure. If you look it up, I'll leave that for a second. Let's talk fighting. Let's just talk about this fight. The Galestalkers, as they're now called. This is an interesting thing here because they're supposed to replace the Wendigo, but they kind of do, but not. They have the patron of the Northern Wind now. Cool, we're moving away from, you know, semi-corrupted cannibalistic spirit that gained its abilities to hunt frozen north in order to fight against the worm. Fast watch. But anyway, they're trackers, hunters in a way. So, I mean, that does connect up, and they have the ability to track whether it comes from the spirit wilds, spirit world Umbra, as it's called 5th edition, or the physical world. So they're trackers, hunters. There really isn't any connection beyond that in a lot of ways. Where they use their abilities for this age period, their merits, their attentions, their drive, again, is to each of their individuals. There isn't a lot of connection to their old version at all, really, other than being hunters. That was something that wasn't the Wendigo. And it's one of those weird places to be where, yeah, they kind of are, but they also aren't. And I think that's the big takeaway I usually take away from 5th edition. 5th edition really isn't 5th edition Werewolf the Apocalypse. It's something like Werewolf the Forsaken, where it was something completely new and different. V5 is very vampire. H5, the 2nd edition Hunter, 3rd edition maybe, is very Hunter the Reckoning lines, even though they did change things dramatically to mechanical as long as they were doing certain things. In the end, it feels very Hunter. This, I don't know. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan, but it's one of those things is like, Wendigo are a very interesting group to build. And I think that's where I have to kind of talk about it. Wendigo are interesting because there's a good concept behind it. But I feel like there definitely is a bit of misinformation or lack of education behind a lot of the ways they were presented. A lot of things in early editions of World of Darkness kind of do this. There are plenty of these cultural groups which, if you look at their original incarnations, don't really describe them well. Even in, like, Vampire, Mage, there are groups, similar to Werewolf, that we have to get to at least W20, or the 20th anniversary stuff, before they're being displayed culturally well. A lot of these cultures that, yeah, this might have been in ancient days, how would they evolve in the modern age, isn't really addressed very well. And I think this is another one that it kind of takes the case. Ukenna does a much better job of displaying how a culture would adapt. Wendigo, it's fighting against adaptation, but it feels like it's this weird uphill battle, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. And there are some aspects that are still kind of negative connotations deep within their culture that are really vestiges of that old, not really building lore well. I think changing the name, changing the patron, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Wendigo is one bite away from something a little bit more corrupt. Just made Sasquatch. That kind of would have been neat. Sasquatch would have been scary. I haven't know what it is. But yes, the Galestalkers exist, and they are supposed to be the Wendigo of 5e, I think. In things I saw, I connect them together. But again, I don't really feel like it very much. They feel like something completely different. Not necessarily bad, but something completely different and not connected with them. And that kind of comes down to where there are aspects of 5e that I say are very good and very bad, and I'm going to have to do about it. But long story short, because everybody's been everywhere, if you get to the Apocalypse Age and maybe Gaia does something that favors Tommy, Werewolf more than anything, because it has to. Because Lupin are falling out. And now they can awaken wherever. If that blood is somewhere deep in them, those Siberian natives, maybe a son or daughter or something, their blood went somewhere deep, far away over the hundreds of generations that have gone by. It could spread anywhere. And now that little bit of blood from these original areas where these people were, these original groups, could awaken. Same could be said for many people in the Americas that have native blood in them. It doesn't need to be a lot to become a werewolf. Maybe that's a cool part about it. That somewhere in there, you're connected with this group that once existed, or that distant ancestor, your great-great-great-great-grandfather. You know, something that's so far away. But a little bit of connection allows you to join their group. Save said for so many people descended from everywhere. It's why when we, nowadays a lot of people get their DNA soon, they can see their connections with nations from far and wide. Because people have always found love wherever it is, and sometimes that blood spreads. And that was a little side thing here that I think, could lead to interesting things. And an evolution of Wendigo. I think, again, just as a little thing here, an interesting evolution that kind of goes somewhere in between these two would be really cool for me. As more people are being born now of their tribe from outside of it, they have to adapt. They cannot go on their high ground. Those that had gone beyond authority in a lot of ways would have found themselves in more position of power and importance, and would have led the tribe to a new something different. Something better, like many of the tribes. Maybe that's what the bit of the end of the world is bringing in. Something better and improved for them, as they have to rely on each other, so they can't rely on them. There's a lot of things with the storyline of W5 I can bring in here. I just wanted to address it. But Wendigo, interesting. A little bit of a mess. Something to think about. So I'll leave it all to you out there to think about. And, as I said earlier, like and subscribing, commenting, ring the bell over on YouTube section. What do you think of this? Is there a path that evolves Wendigo that still respects that it's supposed to be connected to Native American people? It's a tribal werewolf from this region. There are tribal werewolves from a lot of areas of the world. And what is the evolution they would take that makes logical sense? That what changes would you have? What aspects, maybe, do you like of 5e? What aspects do you don't like? Let me know what you think about all this, and what do you think of the game in the comments. And have you played it? I'm interested. Anyway, I'm going. Remember to check out all my other stuff? That's usually over on Twitch, over on YouTube, Twitch side. That's gaming, variety stuff. That's also where I record all my tabletop stuff. I have live plays with TTRPGs. Discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6. Talk about news in the tabletop world. All the tabletop related stuff goes up on YouTube. My YouTube channel, check it out there. Get all the support there. Any kind of schedules, uploads, all that kind of stuff. Any updates to that schedule. Just social media. Discord, Twitter / the Blue Sky, Twitter / X. God, English. That's just these things. Check it out. That gives you updates, cat tips, all that kind of things. Anyway, I'm going. Thank you for joining me. Until the next time, we talk about Werewolf The Apocalypse or something else. I get all at you there, a deep and more. Farewell.